"Security, remove her. She's making the store look cheap." The words cut clean through the soft jazz drifting from the ceiling speakers, sharp enough to still every movement within the marble-floored boutique as conversations died mid-sentence and the faint clink of glass against glass at the champagne counter faded into silence. All eyes turning toward the center of the room, where Angela Brooks stood beside a display of hand-stitched leather bags priced higher than most people's monthly rent, her posture calm, her hands loosely folded in front of her, as if she hadn't just been singled out in a room filled with tailored suits and polished heels, while Victoria Kensington, draped in a cream silk blazer that caught the warm overhead lighting like liquid gold, tilted her chin slightly upward, her expression composed but edged with unmistakable disdain, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard, as two sales associates froze nearby, unsure whether to intervene or disappear, their name tags glinting under the lights as they avoided eye contact, the air thick with something unspoken and heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks over open water, and Angela did not move. Not when a security guard stationed near the entrance shifted his weight and glanced toward the floor manager for confirmation. Not when a woman browsing scarves leaned closer to her friend and whispered something just loud enough to carry. Not even when Victoria took a slow step forward, heels clicking with measured precision against the polished stone, closing the distance between them as if proximity alone could assert ownership over the space, over the moment, over her. "I don't know who let you wander onto the floor," Victoria continued, her tone smooth but laced with quiet authority. "But customers come here for a certain experience, and you're disrupting that." And still Angela's expression did not crack, her eyes steady, reflective, catching the glow of the chandeliers above like still water holding light, her uniform simple compared to the tailored elegance surrounding her, yet perfectly pressed, every line intentional, every detail controlled, as if she had chosen this exact place to stand, this exact moment to remain. And somewhere behind the counter, a register beeped once before falling silent again, the sound oddly loud in the hush, while the faint scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air, layered over leather and polished wood, grounding the scene in something tangible, something real, and yet the tension felt almost unreal, stretched thin across the room like glass about to fracture. Because Angela did not apologize, did not step back, did not explain. She simply stood there, breathing evenly, her gaze level with Victoria's as if the words spoken had not carried the weight they were meant to, as if the power in the room had not already been decided. And in that stillness, quiet, unwavering, deliberate, something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a current beneath calm water, unseen but impossible to ignore. Angela Brooks had arrived 3 hours earlier, just before the late afternoon light began to stretch across the city skyline and slipped through the tall glass windows of the boutique, casting long, quiet reflections across the marble floor as she stepped inside through the employee entrance with a simple canvas tote over her shoulder and no announcement of who she was. No greeting beyond a soft nod to the receptionist who barely looked up from her screen, because Angela had learned long ago that presence did not always need introduction. Sometimes it revealed itself more honestly when it was overlooked, and today she wanted to see everything exactly as it was when no one felt watched, no one felt judged, no one felt the need to perform. So she moved through the store like any other staff member assigned to a late shift, adjusting a display here, straightening a rack there, listening more than speaking, her eyes catching the details most people ignored, the slight hesitation in a junior associate's voice when a well-dressed customer interrupted her mid-sentence, the way another employee stepped back instinctively when a client raised her tone just slightly, not enough to cause a scene, but enough to remind everyone who held the power in the room. And Angela said nothing, not at first, because observation came before action, because understanding always came before judgment, and because she knew that systems revealed themselves in small moments, not grand ones, moments like the one unfolding now, where Victoria Kensington stood surrounded by polished glass cases and curated perfection, expecting the world to bend gently around her without resistance, while Angela stood in a uniform that made her invisible by design, a role she had chosen deliberately for this exact reason, to see how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. And yet, even in silence, Angela's presence carried something steady, something grounded, something that did not shift under pressure, shaped by years that had nothing to do with luxury storefronts or curated lighting. Years spent building something from nothing, navigating rooms where she had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, and still choosing restraint over reaction, dignity over defense, because she understood that power did not need to announce itself loudly to exist. It simply needed to remain unshaken. And now, as the security guard hesitated near the entrance and the floor manager whispered urgently into a headset, unsure how to handle a situation that had suddenly drawn every eye in the store, Angela's gaze moved briefly across the room, taking in the tension, the discomfort, the quiet curiosity, before returning calmly to Victoria, not with defiance, not with submission, but with something far more unsettling to those who relied on hierarchy to define their place, a complete and unwavering certainty in herself, the kind that did not rise to meet disrespect, but also did not step aside for it. And in that stillness, in that refusal to shrink, the air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, as if the room itself was beginning to realize that something about this moment was not unfolding the way it usually did. Victoria Kensington did not step back, because people like her rarely did. Instead, she leaned slightly to one side, her gaze sweeping over Angela with the kind of practiced evaluation reserved for objects rather than people, as if she were deciding whether something belonged on display or should be quietly removed from sight. And a faint smile touched her lips, not warm, not amused, but measured, controlled. "I come here often," she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding customers who had now fully abandoned their own shopping to witness what would happen next. "And this store has always maintained a certain standard." She paused, letting the word linger as her eyes flicked briefly toward the nearby associates who stood frozen between duty and hesitation. "So I am going to assume this is a mistake." The floor manager, Daniel Reeves, appeared at the edge of the scene at that exact moment, his pace quick but his posture restrained, as if he understood that urgency needed to be present but not visible, his suit perfectly tailored, his expression carefully neutral, though the tension in his jaw suggested otherwise. "Is there a problem here, Miss Kensington?" he asked, his tone respectful, almost deferential, and Victoria did not look at him immediately, choosing instead to keep her attention fixed on Angela as if Daniel's presence were secondary. "Yes," she replied simply. "There is," and only then did she turn slightly, enough to acknowledge him without fully shifting her focus. "Your staff is creating an uncomfortable environment." Daniel's eyes moved to Angela then, just for a fraction of a second, but in that glance was calculation, assessment, and something quieter, uncertainty, because there was something about her that did not align with the situation as it appeared on the surface, something composed, something deliberate, something that did not react the way it should have under pressure. And yet procedure was procedure, expectation was expectation, and the weight of a high-value client's complaint carried immediate consequences. "Ma'am," Daniel said carefully, directing his words toward Angela now, "perhaps you could step into the back for a moment while we resolve this." It was not a command, not yet, but it carried the shape of one, wrapped in politeness, offered as a way to restore order without escalation. And still Angela did not move, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, as if the suggestion had simply passed through the air, without landing. And that was when the smallest shift occurred in Daniel's expression, barely visible, but enough to signal that something was no longer following the expected script, because most people would have stepped back by now, most people would have apologized, explained, retreated, but Angela remained exactly where she was, grounded in a calm that did not resist and did not comply, and in that quiet defiance, not loud, not aggressive, but absolute, the balance in the room tilted just slightly, enough for those watching to feel it, even if they could not yet name it. While Victoria's smile faded by a fraction, replaced by a sharper edge, as if she too had begun to sense that control was not settling as easily as it should have, and somewhere behind them, the soft hum of the store's lighting seemed suddenly louder, filling the space between words, between breaths, between expectation and what was about to unfold. Angela finally moved, but not in the way anyone expected, not backward toward the employee corridor Daniel had subtly indicated, not sideways to dissolve into the background where she would be forgotten, but forward, just a single measured step that brought her slightly closer into the center of the space, into the light, into the quiet tension that now held the entire boutique in place. And the movement was small, almost insignificant, yet it shifted something instantly, like a line being redrawn without permission. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, even, carrying no trace of defensiveness, no sharp edge, only clarity. "She is not the problem," she said, her eyes briefly turning toward the young associate who stood near the display, hands clasped tightly together, shoulders slightly drawn inward as if trying to take up less space. "She was doing exactly what she was trained to do." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, because they were not aimed at confrontation. They were aimed at truth, and truth had a way of unsettling people who expected compliance instead. Daniel's posture stiffened just slightly, his professional composure still intact, but now under pressure, because this was no longer a simple customer complaint. This was deviation, disruption, something that did not follow the script he had repeated hundreds of times in this very store. And Victoria let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though there was no amusement in it, only disbelief. "Excuse me," she said, tilting her head, her tone sharpening by a fraction, as if recalibrating the situation in real time. "You do not get to decide what is or is not a problem here." And Angela did not interrupt, did not raise her voice. She simply held her ground, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged, as if the words had been acknowledged but not accepted as authority. And somewhere near the entrance, the security guard shifted again, unsure whether to step in or remain still, his eyes moving between Daniel and Victoria, waiting for a signal that did not come, while the other customers watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, drawn in by the quiet intensity of the moment, the absence of noise making everything feel louder. Every breath, every movement, every second stretching longer than it should. And then Angela spoke again, just as evenly, just as calmly. "Respect is part of the experience," she said, her tone unchanged, her words simple but deliberate, "for everyone." And that was when something flickered across Daniel's face, something quick, almost invisible, recognition or realization or perhaps the beginning of both. Because this was no longer just a staff member overstepping. This was something else. Entirely, something that did not fit the hierarchy he understood, something that did not respond to pressure the way it should have. And Victoria's expression tightened, the effortless control she carried beginning to show the smallest fracture, not enough for most to notice, but enough for the room to feel, because power, when challenged without aggression, without fear, without retreat, often did not know where to land. And in that suspended moment, in that quiet standstill where no one moved, and no one spoke, it became clear that the situation had shifted beyond a simple misunderstanding, beyond a customer complaint, into something far more unsettling, something that had not yet revealed itself, but was already changing the way the room breathed. Victoria's composure did not shatter, but it hardened, like glass under pressure that had not yet cracked, but was no longer flexible, and her eyes narrowed just enough to signal that patience had reached its limit. "This is exactly the kind of behavior I am talking about," she said, her voice still controlled, but now carrying a sharper edge that cut through the air more clearly than before. "Staff overstepping boundaries, making statements they have no authority to make." She turned fully to Daniel now, no longer acknowledging Angela as an equal presence in the exchange, but as something to be managed, corrected, removed. "I expect this handled immediately." And that word, immediately, settled heavily in the space between them, because it carried expectation, pressure, consequence, and Daniel felt it. The weight of a client who spent more in a single visit than most customers did in a year. The kind of client whose satisfaction influenced numbers, reports, decisions made far above his level. And yet something in him hesitated, just for a moment longer than it should have, his gaze flickering again toward Angela, searching for something he could not yet define, because her stillness was not passive, it was deliberate, and that difference mattered even if he could not explain why. "Ma'am," he began again, his tone firmer now, the softness replaced with something closer to directive. "I am going to need you to step away from the sales floor." The words were clear this time, no longer a suggestion, and the security guard took a cautious step forward in response, not aggressive, not forceful, but present enough to signal that the situation was moving toward resolution, at least from their perspective, and still Angela did not move, not immediately, her eyes lowering just briefly, not in submission, but in thought, as if weighing something internal rather than reacting to the external pressure surrounding her. And when she looked back up, there was no anger, no urgency, only the same steady calm that had unsettled the room from the beginning. "So this is the decision," she said quietly, not to challenge, not to provoke, but to confirm, and Daniel hesitated again, because the question was simple, but it carried something beneath it, something that made the answer feel heavier than it should have. "Yes," he said finally, the word landing with more finality than confidence. And for a brief second, no one spoke, no one moved, the air holding its breath as if waiting for something unseen to surface. And Victoria exhaled softly, a faint, satisfied smile returning to her lips as she adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, already shifting her attention away as if the outcome had been decided long before this moment, as if this was simply how things worked, how they always worked, and perhaps that was what made the silence that followed so noticeable, because it did not feel like an ending. It felt like something unfinished, something unresolved, something just beginning to reveal itself beneath the surface. As Angela's fingers moved slowly to the edge of her name tag, brushing against the engraved letters with a light, almost absent motion, as if grounding herself not in the room, not in the tension, but in something far more certain than either. The room did not move forward. It sank inward, into a quiet so complete it felt almost physical, like the air itself had thickened, pressing gently against every surface, every breath, every thought. And Angela's hand rested for a moment longer against the edge of her name tag, before falling back to her side. Not rushed, not hesitant, just controlled, deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to match her pace. And the overhead lights reflected softly along the polished marble floor, stretching her silhouette into a long, quiet line that did not tremble, did not shift, even as the security guard lingered a few feet away, uncertain now, his earlier step forward suspended in hesitation, because something about the stillness in front of him did not match the situation he thought he was stepping into. And Daniel stood where he was, shoulders squared but no longer fully settled, his gaze fixed on Angela as if waiting for her to comply, to break, to react in a way that would restore the order he understood, but she did none of those things. She simply breathed, slow and even, her chest rising and falling beneath the simple fabric of her uniform, her eyes steady, not defiant, not submissive, just present. And in that presence there was something that did not ask for permission, did not seek approval, something that existed independent of the tension around it. And Victoria, who had already begun to shift her attention away, found herself looking back again, just for a second longer than she intended, as if something unresolved pulled her focus back into the moment she believed had already concluded, and the faint smile on her lips softened, not into warmth, but into uncertainty, because the outcome she expected had not fully settled into place. It hovered, unfinished, like a sentence waiting for its final word, and somewhere near the back of the store, a glass display door closed with a quiet click that echoed more loudly than it should have, drawing a few glances before fading back into the silence, and Angela's gaze moved slowly across the room, not searching, not scanning, but acknowledging, the young associate still standing with her hands clasped, the customers who had stopped pretending not to watch, the manager caught between decision and doubt, and then back to Victoria. And for the first time, there was the smallest shift in her expression, not a smile, not even close, but a softness at the edges, something that carried no anger, no resentment. Only a quiet understanding that seemed to exist beyond the moment itself, and she inhaled once, steady and measured, as if preparing not for conflict, but for clarity, and in that breath, in that pause that stretched just long enough for everyone to feel it, the entire room seemed to lean in, waiting, because whatever came next would not be loud, would not be chaotic, but it would change something, something deeper than the surface tension that had brought them all to stillness. Something that had been building quietly from the moment she chose not to step back. Angela did not raise her voice when she finally spoke, And that was what made it impossible to ignore, because the room had already leaned into silence, already surrendered to the weight of the moment, and her words entered that space without force, without urgency, yet they landed with a clarity that shifted everything. "Daniel," she said, not loudly, not sharply, but with a familiarity that did not belong to the hierarchy he believed he understood, and the sound of his name, spoken that way, caused something in him to falter, subtle but immediate, as if a thread he had been holding onto slipped slightly from his grasp, his posture tightening as his eyes fixed fully on her now. Searching, recalculating, trying to place something that no longer fit where it had a moment ago, and Angela's gaze did not waver as she continued, her tone steady, measured. "When did we start prioritizing comfort over respect?" The question was simple, but it did not feel like one that required an answer. It felt like one that exposed something already known, and Daniel's lips parted slightly, then closed again, because the response he had prepared no longer applied, not in the way it had seconds before, and Victoria's expression shifted, just slightly, her confidence not gone, but interrupted, like a rhythm that had lost its timing. "I do not believe this is appropriate," she interjected, her voice firm, but there was something underneath it now, something less certain, something that had not been there before, and Angela turned her head just enough to meet her gaze fully, not confrontational, not dismissive, simply direct. "Appropriate for who?" she asked, and the question lingered, suspended between them, because it did not challenge authority, it challenged assumption, and assumptions were far more fragile than authority ever appeared to be. And somewhere behind the counter, one of the associates lowered her hand slowly, as if something in the air had changed enough for her to breathe again, and Daniel took a step forward, not toward control, but toward understanding, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. "Ma'am, who are you?" And the question, when it finally came, did not carry accusation, it carried realization, the beginning of it, the edge of something that had been building quietly from the moment Angela refused to step back, and for the first time, Angela allowed a small pause to stretch between them, not to create tension, but to let the moment settle into what it was becoming, her fingers moving once more to the edge of her name tag, not fidgeting, not uncertain, just deliberate, and then she lifted it slightly, enough for the engraved letters to catch the light, the polished surface reflecting a soft gleam under the chandelier. "Angela Brooks," she said simply, her voice unchanged. And yet the way she said it, the way she held it, carried something more than identity, something that made Daniel's breath catch almost imperceptibly, because the name was not unfamiliar. It was just never expected to be standing here, in this uniform, in this moment, and the realization did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, piece by piece, expression by expression, until the space between them shifted entirely, and nothing in the room felt the same as it had just seconds before. The name did not echo loudly, but it carried through the room with a weight that replaced the silence with something sharper, something undeniable, and Daniel felt it before he fully understood it, the recognition arriving not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, irreversible shift, like a door closing behind him without sound, his posture straightening instinctively as his expression changed, the uncertainty dissolving into something far more precise, something that bordered on alarm. "Ms. Brooks," he said, the words leaving his mouth carefully, almost cautiously, as if speaking them too quickly might confirm something he was not ready to fully face. And that was when the smallest details began to realign themselves in his mind. The calm, the presence, the refusal to comply, none of it had been defiance, it had been certainty, and that realization settled heavily in his chest, while just a few feet away, Victoria's composure faltered for the first time, not dramatically, not visibly. Enough for everyone to notice, but enough for the room to feel it, because the shift in energy did not need to be announced. It was understood, her gaze moving between Angela and Daniel, searching for confirmation that had not yet been spoken. "What is going on?" she asked her. Voice still controlled, but no longer effortless, no longer certain, and Daniel did not answer her immediately, because his attention had fully locked onto Angela now, his voice lowering slightly, respectful in a way it had not been before. "I was not aware you would be visiting today," he said, and that single sentence, quiet and measured, landed louder than anything that had been said so far, because it carried implication, context, hierarchy, everything that had been invisible seconds ago, now surfacing all at once, and Victoria's expression stilled completely, her mind catching up with what her instincts had already begun to sense, her eyes narrowing not in judgment now, but in realization, as if the entire moment was rearranging itself in her memory in real time, every word, every glance, every assumption shifting into something else entirely, something she had not accounted for. And Angela did not step forward, did not assert, did not elevate herself in any visible way. She simply stood where she had always been, her presence unchanged, her voice calm as she spoke again. "You were not meant to be," she said, her tone even, not accusatory, not cold, just honest, and Daniel nodded once, slowly, as if that answer explained more than it appeared to on the surface, while the security guard, who had been standing ready moments before, now took a step back, subtle but clear, his role in the situation dissolving as quickly as it had formed, and the associates who had been frozen began to shift, their posture adjusting, their attention sharpening, because the hierarchy in the room had just been rewritten without announcement, without ceremony, without effort, and Victoria stood at the center of it, her earlier certainty now replaced by something far more fragile, not fear, not yet, but the unmistakable awareness that she had misread the situation entirely, that the balance of power she had relied on had never actually been in her favor, and in that realization, in that quiet unraveling of assumption, the room exhaled slowly, as if releasing something it had been holding since the moment the first word had been spoken. No one spoke immediately after the realization. Settled, because some truths did not need to be repeated out loud to be understood, they reshaped the room on their own, quietly and completely, and Angela did not move to claim the moment, did not step forward to assert control or correct what had already revealed itself. She simply stood as she had from the beginning, steady and composed, her presence unchanged by the shift in perception around her. And that constancy was what made the difference unmistakable, because power that needed to prove itself often became loud, but power that simply existed remained calm, and Daniel lowered his gaze briefly before lifting it again, his voice careful, measured. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words directed not just to Angela but to the moment itself, to the decision he had made without understanding, and Angela shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, but redirecting the weight of what mattered. "Not to me," she replied softly, her eyes moving toward the young associate still, standing near the display, her posture slowly relaxing now that the tension had begun to dissolve. "To her." And the simplicity of that response carried more authority than anything else that had been said, because it redefined the situation entirely, shifting it away from hierarchy and back to something more fundamental, something that had been overlooked from the start. And Daniel nodded once, immediately, turning to the associate with a sincerity that had not been present earlier, his voice lower, more human, as he addressed her directly, while nearby, the other employees began to straighten, their movements subtle but meaningful, as if the atmosphere itself had changed direction, and Victoria remained where she was, her earlier certainty now replaced with a quiet stillness that did not quite know where to settle, her gaze lingering on Angela as if searching for something to hold on to, something to restore the version of events she had believed in just minutes ago, but nothing returned to her, because the moment had already moved beyond that, and for a brief second, she opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, the words dissolving before they could form, and Angela finally took a step, not toward her, not toward Daniel, but toward the center of the store, her pace unhurried, her posture relaxed, as if the tension had never truly belonged to her in the first place. And as she passed by, she paused just long enough for her voice to reach Victoria, quiet, steady, without judgment. "Luxury is not what you wear or what you buy," she said, not as a correction, but as a reflection. "It is how you treat people when you think it does not matter." And then she continued walking, leaving the words behind like something that did not need to be repeated, did not need to be enforced, because their weight had already settled into the space, into the people, into the silence that followed. And as she moved toward the staircase leading to the upper offices, The late afternoon light shifted slightly through the glass, catching the polished surfaces, the displays, the still figures scattered across the floor. And for a moment, everything seemed quieter than before, not empty, not tense, but resolved, in a way that did not require applause, did not require acknowledgement, only understanding. And Angela did not look back as she ascended, her figure gradually disappearing into the softer light above, leaving behind a room that would not return to what it had been, because something had changed, not loudly, not visibly, but permanently, in the way people would remember this moment long after the store returned to its usual rhythm, in the way silence could sometimes carry more truth than words ever could.